right, at this time, will our Zoom host please start the webinar? Once again, Zoom host, please start our webinar.
It was started.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to today's hybrid New York City Council hearing for the Committee on Women and Gender Equity. We ask all panelists and folks in the public, if you have an electronic device, to please set it to silent or vibrate. If you'd like to submit testimony, please send via email to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair Caban, we are ready to begin.
Thank you. Okay, great. Okay, can I put this towards me a little bit? Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Caban. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the chair of the Committee on Women and Gender Equity. Childcare is not only one of the most pressing issues this committee will be deliberating this year, but indeed one of the most pressing issues facing this city. Today, my colleagues and I are taking a bold step to address this crisis by hearing a package of legislation related to childcare in New York City. It includes intro number 242, sponsored by Councilmember Gutierrez, and related to the establishment of a Marshall Plan for Moms Task Force. Intro 477, sponsored by Councilmember Hudson, establishing a child care task force. Intro number 485, sponsored by Councilmember Menon, related to electronic child care directory. Intro number 486, sponsored by, again, Councilmember Menon, related to establishing a child care advisory board. And the next few pieces also sponsored by Councilmember Menon. Number 487, related to establishing a child care subsidy information portal. 488, related to establishing a child care program fund. 489, related to child care certification program. And intro number 526, of which I am the sponsor, related to child care services at public meetings. And finally, resolution number 69, sponsored by Councilmember Menon, related to supporting the provision of financial assistance to families and child care providers in order to make child care more accessible and affordable. And so much about our city's health, safety, and prosperity depends on more and better child care. Our economy depends on working parents being able to work without worrying about their children. Our child care workforce, overwhelmingly women of color, depends on good jobs at good wages with good labor protections. And the future of our city depends on children having the high-quality care they need to develop into healthy, thriving adults. I'm encouraged by the administration's stated commitment to expanding access to child care, and have been proud to have worked with our mayor to finally expand the access to child care to our undocumented neighbors. This effort, taken alongside alongside parents, providers, and advocates, should serve as a model of what a truly universal, accessible, and equitable child care system can be. It is with this commitment that, as the chair of the Committee on Women and Gender Equity, I'm proud to hold this hearing today on this vital subject and these important pieces of legislation. And before we move to a statement from my colleague, Councilmember Menon, I would also like to thank my staff, including Stephanie Silkowski, my Chief of Staff, and Madhuri Shukla, my Legislative Director. Additionally, thank you to the committee staff for their work in preparing this hearing and working on the legislation, including Brenda McKinney, Committee Counsel, Anastasia Zamina, Legislative Policy Analyst, Jessica Fung, Senior Legislative Counsel, and Aisha Ray, Finance Unit Head. Finally, I also want to acknowledge one of our committee members who is present, Councilmember Richardson Jordan. Thank you. And I will turn it over to my colleague, and then you'll administer the oath? Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Caban, for holding this incredibly important hearing today on childcare. Childcare is a national crisis in this country. Parents and guardians have fewer and fewer choices for childcare with ever-increasing costs. The average childcare cost in New York City for infants below 18 months is over $21,000 per year, according to the Office of the New York City Comptroller. For toddlers between 18 and 24 months, it's at least $16,000 per year. Childcare should not be determined by your income. It should be determined simply by need. And the needs of parents and guardians, of childcare workers, of childcare providers are being unmet. My 5 bills before the committee would advance New York City towards universal childcare for all. Intro number 486, the Child Care Advisory Board, which has a supermajority of co-sponsors, I want to say at 36 members, would have the power and duty to make recommendations on legislation, regulation, policies, procedures, and initiatives to make childcare more affordable and advance New York City on a 5-year plan to implement universal childcare. The 7 members of the Child Care Advisory Board, including designees from the mayor, the speaker, controller, public advocate, Department of Education, Department of Health, and ACS. The board would be required to submit an annual report to the mayor and city council on how to improve and address problems child care providers face and make it more affordable, including reviewing and assessing universal child care and subsidies to families. Intro number 484, which also has a supermajority of co-sponsors, would create an electronic child care directory. Intro number 487, which also has a supermajority of co-sponsors, would require the creation of a website with information related to city, state, and federal subsidies. Intro number 488 would award grants of up to $20,000 per child care facility if they are at risk of closure or displacement. And finally, intro number 489 would have the mayor designate an agency for a child care certification program. Specifically, this would be for building owners hosting child care facilities. Developing a child care certified building program will maintain and increase the number of eligible child care facilities in the city of New York. Let me just say, as a mother of 4 and a working mom, I know the importance of childcare. From 2015 to 2020, at least 1,100 childcare centers have closed. Childcare providers have cited numerous problems, ranging from financial costs to the time needed for background checks. Parents and guardians shouldn't be punished for these issues, and it is our job to resolve this ongoing crisis. This is one of the wealthiest cities in the world, and we need to prioritize working families, small businesses, childcare workers, and centers in our recovery. I'm so thankful that a majority of my colleagues, supermajority, have signed on to these bills to stand with us today and demand universal childcare. I really want to thank the administration because I know they have made a really strong effort on promoting universal childcare, and I look forward to the testimony today. Thank you so much to the chair.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge committee member and colleague, Councilmember Gutierrez, and invite you to make a statement as well. Do you want a minute, though? Get settled. Do your thing. All right, you got it.
Okay, thank you, Chair. By default, New York City public school teachers do not get paid leave when they have a baby, despite or perhaps in spite of the fact that over 75% of teachers are women. Any paid leave is negotiated through collective bargaining, and even still, it is extremely limited. Nurses, by default, do not get paid leave when they have a baby. Regardless of whether they are a private or public employee, their healthcare employer may not choose to offer paid family leave. In New York, 95% of nurses are women. I provide these examples of women we called essential workers not very long ago, because as we were cheering for them and saying thank you, we were never really providing the support they needed and asked for. It has always been difficult to be a working mom, but particularly in light of the issues that have become more acute during the pandemic, it's critical to create a new framework of support as we enter a new normal, both in the workplace and in our daily lives. I'm proud that today, my bill, the Marshall Plan for Moms, will be heard by this committee, and we can begin the work of better understanding and developing recommendations on how to truly support working mothers and caregivers. And I just also want to give a shout out to all the people who made the Marshall Plan for working moms possible. I am not the first, I am not the pioneer, I'm also not the first working mom, so I just want to pay my respects to all the working moms and working parents before me. And this is going to be, I think, a really exciting hearing and an opportunity as a majority women council to create spaces for ourselves and demand the respect and dignified working conditions that we all deserve. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, we will administer the oath to the administration. If you can please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions today?
I do.
I do. Great, thank you. And at this point, we can move to testimony. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Caban and members of the Committee on Women and Gender Equity. I am Jacqueline Ebanks. My pronouns are she and hers, and I am Executive Director of New York City's Commission on Gender Equity. In this role, I also serve as an advisor to the Mayor on policies and issues affecting gender equity in New York City for all girls, women, transgender, and gender non-binary New Yorkers, regardless of their physical and mental abilities, age, ethnicity or race, their faith, gender expression, immigrant status, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status. After my testimony today, I will be joined by Simone Hawkins, Chief Executive of Early Childhood Education Operations at the Department of Education, Corinne Schiff, Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Health at the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and Elizabeth Wolkamere, Deputy Commissioner at the Division of Child and Family Wellbeing at the Administration for Children's Services. We all will respond to the questions you have after testimony. As New York City recovers from the debilitating impacts of COVID-19, the Adams administration is committed to building an inclusive and equitable city for all New Yorkers. It is within this context that CGE works to remove equity barriers across the city and carries out its activities in 3 areas of focus within a human rights framework and using an intersectional lens. Our areas of focus are: 1, economic mobility and opportunity, where we pursue a goal to create a city where all people of all gender identities and gender expressions live economically secure lives and have access to opportunities to thrive. Our second area of focus is health and reproductive justice. We pursue the goal to foster a city free from gender and race-based health disparities. And finally, our third area of focus is safety, where we seek to foster a city free from gender and race-based violence. The Adams administration is committed to supporting cis women, transgender, and gender non-binary and non-conforming caregivers as they raise the next generation of New Yorkers. Research indicates that in low-income communities, the average annual cost of center or home-based childcare in New York City can constitute as much as 36 to 65% of median household income. The high cost burden of childcare, coupled with the lack of flexible and supportive work policies, can hinder parents and caregivers from participating in the economy, especially women. Even when they do participate, they can face pay disparities based on caregiver status and gender, which further entrenches inequities. Last year, a report from the Economic Development Corporation estimated the financial impact of New York City parents leaving the workforce due to a lack of childcare to be $2.2 billion in tax revenues. This further highlights the link between childcare and the city's post-pandemic recovery. This administration recognizes that achieving an equitable economic recovery requires a stronger childcare infrastructure and better compensation and recognition of caregivers while addressing the discrimination they face. The landscape of childcare services across New York City includes center-based, home-based, pre-K, 3 through K, and private care services that are not subsidized. 4 agencies play a role in supporting and regulating these kinds of care. The Administration for Children's Services, ACS, administers the Child Care Block Grant funding from the state, which consists largely of federal funds. This includes funding child care assistance for families, receiving cash assistance through the Human Resources Administration, as mandated, as well as providing vouchers to low-income families, unhoused New Yorkers, and child welfare-involved families. ACS also transfers $125 million of the Child Care Block Grant funding each year to the Department of Education to help fund contracted childcare, including extended day and early learn. In addition to contracting for extended day and early learn subsidized care, the DOE contracts and provides pre-K to 4-year-olds and 3K to 3-year-olds during the school day and administers the Head Start grant. HRA helps families who receive cash assistance and who are working or going to school to access childcare either through contracts or vouchers. And finally, the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene regulates childcare, including monitoring with health and safety requirements. Yesterday, the administration released a blueprint for childcare and early childhood education, which lays out our plans to expand equitable access to affordable, high-quality childcare. The blueprint includes common sense initiatives for a quality system that supports family and childcare providers. This blueprint is just the beginning of our work to make childcare high quality, affordable, and accessible. It sets goals to, 1, increase access to childcare assistance for thousands of children across New York City, including children in high-need neighborhoods, children living in temporary housing, and children whose immigration status precludes them from receiving state and federally funded care. 2, we seek to make care more affordable by reducing the amount families receiving subsidized care contribute towards their child care. 3, we wish to increase capacity by creating more child care and early education seats by leveraging tax abatements and credits to facilitate additional capacity. 4, we want to improve the process for families by creating a single online child care application portal to make applying for child care easier. 5, our goal is also to enhance supports for the child care workforce, to reduce administrative burden, create more financial stability, and achieve higher quality care. 6, we want to grow a highly qualified childcare workforce by widening access to provided career advancement and expanding opportunities for early childhood professionals to earn higher education credentials in partnership with CUNY's New York Early Childhood Professional Development Institute. And finally, 7, we want to leverage leadership from City Hall and the community by establishing a new centralized childcare and early childhood education office and convening an advisory group to ensure we are working hand in hand with the community and childcare providers who serve our families every day. In addition to developing the blueprint, Mayor Adams also successfully advocated this year for a number of measures at the state level to improve childcare and support families in New York City. For example, the mayor championed an enhancement to the earned income tax credit in the New York State budget and committed to increasing the city's annual investment to EITC to help put more money back in the pockets of families. The administration also advocated for the state to increase the income eligibility for families to receive subsidized childcare from 200% to 300% of the federal poverty line. Therefore, starting in August 2022, a family of 4 earning up to $83,250 can access subsidized child care, as opposed to just families earning less than $55,500. We will continue to advocate for the state to eliminate the need for families to be earning at least minimum wage in order to be eligible for child care, as well as fight for the state to enable counties to use state dollars to provide child care for undocumented children. The administration is grateful for the partnership of this council, including the chair of this committee, to include $10 million in the FY 2023 city budget for ACS to develop a new program to provide child care to undocumented children. In closing, I'd like to offer a few comments on the bills being considered today, some of the bills. We appreciate the intent of the legislative package and look forward to discussing these bills further with Council. Intro 242. This bill would create a Marshall Plan for Moms Task Force chaired by the Commission on Gender Equity. Its purpose would be to study, develop, and issue proposals and recommendations on how to support working mothers and caregivers given the vulnerabilities exposed by the pandemic. We appreciate the intent of this bill and look forward to working with Council on this further. Intro 477 and Intro 486. Both of these bills would establish task forces or advisory bodies to examine challenges and issue recommendations around child care access and provision. The administration appreciates the intent behind both bills and agrees that bringing government, providers, parents, and advocates together to work on these issues is critical. As outlined in Mayor Adams' blueprint released yesterday, the administration intends to establish a solutions-oriented advisory board, which we believe can fulfill the goals of these two bills. We look forward to discussing this further with Council and to identifying alignment across our shared goals. Intro 485. This bill would require the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and the Office of Technology and Innovation to collaborate on a website that provides a list and search function for childcare providers operating in New York City. DOHMH already offers such a website. It's called Childcare Connect, and the administration supports codification of this important resource. We are also happy to share more information about Childcare Connect with Council, including how families can access this resource. Intro 487. This bill would require the Administration for Children's Services, the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and the Office of Technology and Innovation to create an online portal informing the public of childcare subsidies. The administration wholeheartedly agrees that parents and caregivers should not have to navigate complex bureaucracy to get their children care. That is why the first major application of the My City web portal will be a single, unified application process for all subsidized childcare options offered by the city. The administration is committed to developing and implementing solutions that will ensure families can seamlessly navigate care options. We look forward to keeping the Council informed on our progress as we move ahead with this project. Intro 488, the bill would require ACS to establish a child care program fund to award grants of up to $20,000 to child care programs at significant risk of closure or displacement in the city. We agree that it is essential that we support child care providers. The city has taken several important steps to ensure the financial stability of our providers, which are outlined in the city's child care and early childhood blueprint that we released yesterday. First, we successfully advocated to Albany to increase the maximum amount we can reimburse child care providers and made it easier for providers to apply for those higher reimbursement rates. In addition, throughout the pandemic, we have continued to pay providers for days that children are absent, including due to illness. And we are committed to continuing to listen to providers and families. They will be key partners in the Child Care Advisory Council we are standing up. Intro 489, this bill would require the mayor to designate an administering agency to create a child care certification program so buildings can apply to be recognized as a child care certified building. We share the same goals as Council when it comes to expanding access to child care, and we look forward to discussing this with you further. Finally, Intro 526. This bill would require the provision of child care services upon request for certain meetings open to the public. The administration recognizes the importance of increasing civic engagement opportunities for caregivers, many of whom are women, and are extending child care services throughout the city with this in mind. The administration has concerns on the complexity of delivering the proposed childcare services due to location licensing and the varied frequency of need and request of service providers. We would like to discuss this bill further with Council. In conclusion, the Adams administration understands the critical importance of strengthening the childcare sector for families, workers, and New York City's post-pandemic recovery. The blueprint released yesterday charts a course towards achieving greater access to affordable, high-quality childcare and building a system that is innovative and supportive of both families and providers. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. We're happy to answer any questions you may have and look forward to continuing this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we have been joined by Councilmember Riley. Okay, so I'd like to start with just some general questions. And I think it makes sense to start with some of the overall challenges. What are the greatest challenges facing the provision of childcare in New York City, and what about for the youngest children or related to after school programs as examples?
I'm sorry, Chair, I didn't hear.
That's okay, sorry. I want to start with overall challenges, so kind of start broad and narrow a bit. What are the greatest challenges facing the provision of childcare in New York City? Particularly what about for the youngest children? What are the biggest challenges related to after-school programs, et cetera?
As I mentioned, we have this network of 4 agencies that provide these varied types of services. And so what is key to us in this work as we move forward is collaboration and really working together to ensure seamless service delivery. As you point out, there are challenges. And so with that, I'm going to turn over to my colleagues at ACS, DOHMH, and DOE to talk about those issues.
Good morning, Elizabeth Wolkamir. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Child and Family Wellbeing at the Administration for Children's Services. The challenges and those that we're seeking to address in the blueprint that were released yesterday are ensuring that caregivers across the city have adequate access to subsidized care, meaning affordable care, given the cost of childcare throughout the city. And as my colleague addressed, we have addressed that in the blueprint that was released yesterday across our continuum of care. We also agree that it is really critical to make sure that our providers are well supported and have adequate funding. We have done a few things in that regard. One is to advocate to Albany successfully to ensure that we can provide the maximum reimbursable rate allowable to our providers and to make it easier to apply for that rate. We also think it's really critical to ensure that it is easier for families to apply, which is why we are creating a single front door application and portal where families can understand their options and can apply for care. And we know that we need to continue to be focused on quality, which is why we are investing in the workforce and career development opportunities for the workforce.
Good afternoon, Corinne Schiff, she, her. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Health. I think that my colleague from ACS has really addressed a broad range of challenges, as have the chair and the council members. I don't have anything to add, but look forward to the ongoing conversation about the details.
Thank you.
It's always so difficult to talk with the mask on. Good afternoon, Simone Hawkins, Chief Executive of EC Operations at New York City DOE. Also nothing to add, but we are definitely champions in line with all of you and our colleagues here to move this work forward.
If I could also add the robust investment in collaboration across the city from all stakeholders. And so you see the advisory group being created and an office. I think we want to make sure that all the stakeholders have a voice and contribute to the improvement of our systems and to increasing access and deepening the resources we give to our youngest New Yorkers, 0 to 5. And I think that is fully reflected in the mayor's blueprint. It's really a comprehensive launch, and it's only a beginning. We intend to learn from these opportunities of engagement and then to build on that to give New Yorkers what they deserve in this area of childcare.
Thank you. And my next question, I think, is one that most folks in the room intimately understand the importance of, but I think it's important for the administration to articulate this, for the record and for the public. But why is childcare important for working families and women in particular?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I know you're in the mask, and I'm.
It's okay.
on your
Yeah. I
scale.
apologize. I'm going to be keeping my mask on the entire hearing, so I will try to speak a little bit more clearly. I apologize. I was just saying that I know that this is the answer to this question. I know is one that is like intimately clear to most of the people in the room, but I do believe it's important for the administration to articulate it, and that's why is childcare important for working families and women in particular?
And I didn't have my mic on, my apologies. At the Commission on Gender Equity, we talk about these 3 areas of focus: economic mobility and opportunity, health and reproductive justice, and safety as being interconnected. That in the complexity of human lives, what people strive for and what a city strives to do is to ensure that every New Yorker has the opportunity to be economically secure, to be healthy, to have full autonomy over their reproductive lives, and to be safe. Childcare is the beginning of that investment, and one could argue from prenatal care. It's how we care about the future of our city. And so we want to make sure, as a city and as the Adams administration, we are there for those most vulnerable, there for those where, we're there for all our citizens, but there's a particular vulnerability and also particular opportunity to strengthen the future if we invest deeply and consistently in childcare. And I think that's what you're seeing here for our administration, that no child, no individual in our city will go unattended to and abandoned, if you will, because this city and this administration will be here laying down long-term solutions for their care and their well-being.
And do you believe that the city is providing adequate coverage for those who need childcare? Why or why not?
No, I think that's what the plan indicates. We know there's a gap, right? There's a gap that we've inherited, and as a part of this journey, we now have to take up that issue and close the gap to the best of our ability and as much as possible. And so the blueprint is that effort. It's a start to closing the gap, to remediating the past and the failures therein, and to moving forward, to building as well on the successes of the past and extending those successes. So what you see in that blueprint is really this effort to move forward, to be there for the youngest New Yorkers in a holistic way. And I can't emphasize that enough. And I think we've all pointed to the data. We've pointed to the vulnerability of mothers. We've pointed to the vulnerability of caregivers from an economic perspective. The pandemic underscored those vulnerabilities. And I think we all recognize our responsibility to create positive change so that as a society, we're better prepared for future events such as this.
I'll just add that the mayor was very clear in the announcement yesterday that the goal and value of this administration is to move towards universal childcare, and that these efforts are a first step in that direction, and a huge one that will touch more than 41,000 children, but that there is an understanding that we need to continue the drumbeat towards universal care.
And I'd like to dig into those details, right? Like when we talk about there's a gap, we want to fill it, there's a desire to do that, we want to take these steps. Like what are the steps? What steps can the city take to expand the number of child care providers and the number of seats in child care programs?
Sure, I'll speak a little bit to the pieces. I'll speak at a high level about the blueprint and the pieces that are in there, and will defer to my colleagues as well. The blueprint both seeks to expand subsidy to families, particularly low-income families in high-need areas or in particularly vulnerable circumstances. So the Administration for Children's Services will be expanding subsidized vouchers for child care assistance to over 18,000 children. And that includes moving through the wait list that we have already made significant progress on. That includes targeting 17 high-need...
How large is the wait list?
Sure. I'm sorry?
How large is the wait list?
The wait list, when we began doing this work, was 35,000 children. We have already offered, and I should be clear that the wait list is not necessarily children that are eligible or families that haven't, in the interim, received another option for childcare, which is to say that we are in the process of offering childcare to every family of the children on that list. Of those 35,000 children, we've already reached out to the families of 28,000 children, and by September, we will have moved through the entire wait list. In addition, we are pursuing access expansion for child care assistance through vouchers in the 17 highest need community districts in the city. And these are community districts that have the highest rates of poverty, including child poverty, the highest rates of unemployment, and that have inadequate access to child care today. We are also focused on continuing our work to offer child care assistance to children and families that are unhoused. And as Edie Banks mentioned, we, for the first time, thanks to you all and to the city's investment, are going to be able to offer childcare assistance to undocumented children. I'll hand it over to my colleague at DOE to talk about the work that they are doing under the blueprint.
Thank you. Put this a little bit closer. I think the primary goal of the blueprint is to create very necessary coordination amongst the agencies that impact child-facing services. And I think it achieves that in its planning stages, and it will achieve that as we build out the strategies. Additionally, as it relates to the Department of Education, we are first looking at sustaining existing capacity with providers currently offering childcare across the city. That will look like creating a very dynamic enrollment strategy to support an increase in enrollment, and obviously the drawdown of revenue sources to support their businesses. The conversion of seats so that we can provide slots to families as based on their needs, their preferences in the areas that they prefer to send their children. And as we collaborate across agencies looking at adding capacity, may it be through a tax abatement, and working to develop an RFP really steeped in the community needs as based on a community assessment that we are working to develop.
I'll just add briefly that on the supply side, as Ms. Hawkins alluded to, there is a provision for a tax abatement to retrofit spaces for child care facilities and a tax credit for employers that offer free or subsidized care. And so altogether that will create, we think, access for an additional 17,000 children.
Thank you. And it was mentioned in the administration's testimony that the city has been working with the state to improve the provision of childcare, and since the city doesn't have authority, and because the city doesn't have authority over the centers, like, I just am interested in the detail of like what that looks like. What are the ways that the city works with the state to improve these things? Can you describe the communications between the city and state about the status of childcare centers and safety for children at the start of the pandemic?
Sure. So let me take those things one at a time. There are a number of things we've advocated to the state for, both in legislative strategy and then executive actions to make things, to improve childcare. We have worked with the Office of Children and Family Services to reduce family fees as much as legally possible, which means that the subsidy that we are providing to families has increased. We have also worked with OCFS to advocate for the higher reimbursement rate for providers. All of those things are decisions that the city can't make on their own and are bound by our oversight and the state. We have also had a very successful legislative session. As you heard in the budget, we were able to pursue and see an increase in eligibility from 200% of the federal poverty level to 300% of the federal poverty level, which is a significant advancement in being able to serve more families that we know are still very low income, especially given the costs in this city. We also have two bills that are pending signature from the governor that would make it that would make care easier and more flexible for families, namely that allowing families to recertify their care every 24 months instead of every 12 months. We know that families that are forced to recertify every year have to do a lot of paperwork, which I think we all know introduces the opportunity for it to be confusing or complicated, and most of those families remain eligible. So this, if signed by the governor, would allow us to be able to keep families having better continuity of care, not having to go through that administrative burden. You asked, I think, second about the relationship with the state. So as I mentioned, we've done a good bit of advocacy and conversation on the legislative front, and OCFS serves as our oversight. So our conversations about the child care in New York City that is funded by the state block grant are ongoing and continuous, on a weekly, monthly basis. We're having conversations with them.
Great. And what's the current ability of 3K programs in the city to provide every 3-year-old with a seat in a 3K program?
And I'm so sorry to make you say that one more time. I missed
Sure.
the beginning of that.
What is the current ability of 3K programs in the city to provide every 3-year-old with a seat in a 3K program?
Yeah, so the DOE is incredibly committed to providing birth through 5 services for all families that require and expect a seat. That includes our 3-year-olds. So we're committed to increasing the number of seats as per the prior plan this year in FY23. I believe the original goal was to increase it through FY24 as well. So we are looking again at existing providers to see if we can increase capacity there, looking to build capacity in new spaces with new providers, just to keep forward with that commitment to build new seats, again, to support a birth through 5 continuum, but also those in need of a 3-year-old seat.
And again, I apologize. I was actually whispering it to committee council that the acoustics are tough in this room, so I have a hard time hearing your answers as well. I'm straining a little bit, and I hear what you're saying about having a plan year over year for increases, but I just want to push a little bit more to get some concrete information. And I don't know if I missed it at the top of your answer at sort of where the current ability sits, just to get a really accurate assessment of what the perceived gap is.
So we need to really reassess what that gap is by conducting a community assessment, right? Because we have to also recognize that the needs change year over year based on communities. However, currently we are primed to support 38,000 3-year-olds in the current fiscal year, and we're planning to increase to 51,000 slots for the next fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. And I'd love to follow up on obviously the progress of sort of tracking who we're missing and where those gaps are. I do want to touch a little bit about affordability and a post-Roe New York City, given the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson, which came down last Friday. It is now imperative to ensure that folks have all of the necessary supports to maintain their gains in education and economy, with childcare being one of the most critical needs. And so affordability remains a major barrier, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommends 7% of a family's income as a benchmark for what is affordable childcare. So do you collect data on what proportion of families in New York City falls at or below that benchmark? And if so, how and at what intervals? And if not, why?
I can't speak to whether or not the city collects data for the entire childcare system, which is to say the childcare system that includes private pay. What I can speak to is the share that families are required to pay when they apply for subsidy. So as I mentioned, we've reduced the fees significantly, and that 7% standard is often spoken about in the context of childcare assistance and childcare vouchers. What we've done is actually go much further. So for families that are 100% of the federal poverty level, or whose income rather is 100% of the federal poverty level or below, those families are paying the minimum fee, which is $1. For families that are between 100 and 200% of the federal poverty level, and as of August, it will be between 100% and 300% of the federal poverty level, we have reduced their family share to only 1% of their income above 100% of federal poverty level.
Thank you. And I have additional questions, but I want to make some space for my colleagues to ask as well, so I'm going to hand it over to Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair Kawan. I do appreciate that you pronounced my last name correctly. Thank you so much.
I got you.
So I have a couple of questions. The first one being related to considering the amount of folks that are or will be working remotely, right? The need for childcare is still very much relevant, whether or not they're working remotely or away. What is the administration's plan, obviously working jointly with all of the agencies here, to really work on those communities, whether it's like building brick and mortar or just opportunities for providers? What is the administration's response to that uptick in remote work, and kind of how that changes the access that families are going to need for childcare?
Let me know if you want to weigh in. I'll just say that families, the requirements, which I think, as we've said, are grounded in federal and state law and regulation, are that to receive child care assistance, that caregivers must be either working or in a qualified activity. There is not a distinction between remote work and otherwise. So long as a family is able to document their work, they are eligible for a subsidy.
I'm sorry, were you going to answer? I just wanted to elaborate, but go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add, as it relates to DOE seats, may they be 3K, pre-K, or even Head Start, there are no barriers or restrictions to enrolling a child for a family that's working remotely.
So my question was, and maybe these are more like nuanced scenarios where there are folks who enroll their child in a daycare facility near where they work, and are no longer doing that. And so sometimes there are situations in communities where they're just not as accessible, or the option for providers, daycare providers, childcare providers versus daycare centers. So is there some scenario with the administration where we're looking into that, where you are looking into that, and kind of what is the solution in that instance?
So the continuum is really grounded in parent choice, and we know that we have more work to do to make sure there's adequate supply out there. But a caregiver can choose to transfer that enrollment of their child, including to they can use their child care voucher with a family member, a close family friend, informal care, if you will, like that. So they have options anywhere from those types of intimate relationships where they would want the caregiver to be someone they know, to family-based care, to a child care center, either using a voucher or through the DOE system.
Okay, fantastic. Are there certain communities where you feel that there is, for lack of a better term, a desert where, I think in certain parts of my district, for example, I know that there are portions of the South Side where we have a decent amount of daycare centers, but I think other parts of Ridgewood, for example, don't have that. So can you all share a sense of what those neighborhoods look like? And is there an interest in kind of building these out more, like actual centers and centers, I guess, owned by the city?
Yeah. First, I would say OCFS, that my colleague referred to, has really been a trailblazer in identifying childcare deserts across the state, including the city, working to release RFIs to support the build-out of new seats in existing programs, seats in new buildings, for that very reason. I think one thing we want to acknowledge is, in addition to childcare deserts, again, we have to right-size and optimize placement based on family need. Mm-hmm. There may be a lot of seats in one community, but that is not the particular age group that the family requires. We need to focus on infant toddler care in addition to building out 3K and pre-K, right? A kid is 2 before they are 3, and we need to create capacity for those families in need as well. So absolutely looking at, again, converting seats where possible, building capacity in places that already have a permit or license, maybe through DOHMH or OCFS, in a variety of settings, right? Preference is not just about location, but also environment.
Yeah.
Families may want a center-based slot, others may want a home-based slot. So we have to acknowledge and recognize the needs of the families and really build out from there.
Thank you. And my last question with 30 seconds, Chair. Given that there are so many more New Yorkers, I would say, working in non-traditional jobs, right? So they're not filling the 9 to 5 anymore. They're doing the evening, the weekend hours, oftentimes more than one job at the same time. What accommodations or what considerations are being made for those for those dynamics when it comes to providing childcare for these folks? And it's an opportunity to educate me as well, because I would love to know.
I'll say from the voucher side, families are able to enroll in care for the hours that are aligned with the activity of either work or school or training that they are enrolled in. So assistance is available. I think we have more to do to look at whether or not there is sort of adequate childcare options available during irregular hours, if you will, or non-traditional hours. Again, we do know that that ability to choose between types of environments is really important to families that are working or in an activity during non-traditional hours, so that they can access either informal or family-based care at hours that a center may not be open.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I'd like to, acknowledge that we have been joined by Councilmember Gennaro, good to see you, and pass it over to Councilmember Menon.
Thank you so much, Chair. First of all, I want to thank the administration for their testimony today. I am thrilled to hear that the administration is in support of my package of universal child care bill and shares the goal of finally getting New York City to universal child care. So just a few questions. On Intro 485, your testimony indicated that you believe that this would then codify Child Care Connect. I just want to say I have real concerns with Child Care Connect. We've spent a ton of time on this website. We've heard from advocates, from constituents who are trying to find child care in their neighborhood, and when they utilize the search function, it doesn't oftentimes work. So would respectfully ask that the administration go back and review the functionality of that, because we absolutely have to improve that.
We'd be happy to take a look and also to work with your office to identify the specific issues. The point of Child Care Connect is to make it usable for families, and that's our goal.
Okay, terrific. I mentioned in my opening statement that over 1,100 child care facilities have closed in recent years, so the intent of Intro 488 and 489 is to address that, so I'm delighted to see that you all are in support of that. Another issue that has been raised repeatedly by advocates to my office is about background checks. I know in the mayor's blueprint for childcare, it was mentioned that you're going to be addressing the issue of background checks. My question is, what is the average wait time currently for a background check?
So let me say first that we know how critically important it is for families when they drop their child off at childcare to know and be confident that the people caring for their children have been fully cleared. And we also know how important it is for childcare providers to get good service and to get a timely response from the health department. The turnaround times are too long, longer than we want them to be. I don't have the exact number with me today, but I will say, as you saw in the blueprint, we are thrilled that we have been authorized to hire 40 staff and to build some technology, and that's going to help us speed up that process.
Okay, I mean, obviously no one's saying to abbreviate the process and create any, I mean, I'm a parent, no one wants to create any kind of danger, of course, but we want to make sure that the process is expedited. I have 2 child care providers in my neighborhood that are closing, they say, because of this background check wait. They literally have been waiting for so long that now they are forced to close. So again, I just want to reiterate the importance of creating some kind of effective but expeditious process.
We agree.
Okay, great. Next question. can the administration share some of the reasons of why so many childcare centers, I mean, we talked about background checks, but there are other reasons as why that they're closing. What additional steps can be done to prevent that? And do you all have any estimates about how many new centers might close in the coming year?
I can't say that I have, unless my colleagues do, any concrete data about other reasons for closure, but I can tell you what we know and hear anecdotally, which is that the pandemic, as it was on many businesses, was very difficult, that increasing costs and inadequate reimbursement, which is why we've focused on that, puts a strain on providers and their ability to have and keep staff, and I think all of the struggles across the workforce are certainly a part of that. I think, we've been laser focused on trying to figure out ways to support providers, including through the pandemic. I don't have any approximation of providers that are on the verge of closing, but what we have done is work with and at the state level and at the city level to do everything we can to stabilize providers. Throughout the pandemic, we offered a number of waivers, including waivers to be able to pay providers for when they had to close because there was a COVID outbreak, and have continuity of financial support there, and to be able to pay providers when children were absent, and we continue to do that. We know that, we've all changed the way we operate, and it's great to be here in person today, but we're not fully out of the woods on the pandemic. We also, as I said, have advocated for and implemented this higher reimbursement rate, which we think is really critical to being able to have providers have stability and stay open and keep up with cost of care.
Okay, and half of all community districts are a child care desert. I happen to represent one, Roosevelt Island. What can be done to address this? What is the administration's plan to reduce this so that every single community and neighborhood across the city of New York has accessible, affordable child care?
I think this is exactly what the blueprint is about, right? The work that we describe in the blueprint is foundational towards universal access. I think key in that is the consistent dialogue among stakeholders, which will really be able to give us sort of firsthand account of on-the-ground experience regarding gaps and regarding successes. Also, we have this focus on the 17 high-need communities, right? So I think we get the data, and we know where we see the greatest vulnerability at this point in time. I think the other thing to remember that this is also very fluid, right? Sort of if you look on the demographics and where kids sprout up at what time and when, not things that per se, well, we can predict once we identify a pregnancy, but I won't go there because gives me shudders based on the SCOTUS decision. But I think what we're talking about is the systemic, holistic approach built upon community input, built upon collaboration among providers, and then I think also what you're alluding to is what I am going to refer to as speed to market, right? How quickly do we identify the need and respond to it? So overall, that's what we're trying to build. And the blueprint is foundational to that. We have in the first, I think, 4 years, 800 million investment, and which will sort of elevate total investment in childcare to $2 billion in New York City. And so we'll continue to study it with the various operations, with the creation of the child care office that will report directly to Deputy Mayor for strategic initiatives, and the centralizing of the operations as well.
Okay, thank you.
And before I pass it along, I just want to follow up and echo a concern that I share with Councilmember Menon, because the federal law currently requires that background checks for child care providers be processed within 45 days. And I understand that DOHMH, which oversees the checks, is not in compliance with that, and that it's in fact taking many months to process these checks. And obviously, as we all are well aware, we can't expand care if there are no educators cleared to be in the classrooms. And so I just really, really want to impress the importance of Knowing exactly what the administration's plan is for significantly reducing that length of time it's taking to process background checks, and then also being up to date on the progress that's being made in executing that plan.
Our goal is to meet that federal requirement, and as we outlined in the blueprint, we've been authorized to hire 40 staff. We are looking for great people to join our team at the health department. Would love to have you circulate our job postings and send great people our way. We're also building technology so that we will be able to automate some of the process, make sure that applications that are submitted are complete and without error. We'll continue to provide technical assistance to providers to help them manage the complex paperwork. Our goal is the same as yours, and I'm very happy that we've now been authorized to bring on that staff and to build an IT system, and I think that in the coming months we'll start to see those timelines reduced.
And what is the timeline for bringing on those 40 staff members?
So we've begun the hiring process. We are all functioning in a difficult labor market, so I don't know, but we're going to be working as quickly as we can. These are high priority hires, and so I hope within the coming months to have people on board fully. Obviously, we're not going to wait to have all 40. We're going to bring people on as we get good applicants, and we're hopeful that it will be, will not be a drawn out process. It is a difficult labor market, so I would love everyone's help sending talented people to the health department website to take a look at our postings.
Great, thank you. And I will pass it over to Councilmember Riley.
Thank you, Councilmember Caban. Thank you to the administration. We really appreciate your presentation today. Hearing a lot of great things from this blueprint. As a parent, childcare is very important to me as well. One thing I realized recently is that there is a desert within a lot of communities. I'm just going to echo the sentiments of Councilmember Gutierrez and Councilmember Menon, but I did hear a lot about collaboration, community input. Can you just walk us through how do you plan on executing the community assessment? How do you plan on getting community input? A lot of the times, it's not anyone's fault or per se, but usually when we hear about community assessments, they happen after they happen, and then when we're going to our communities, they never get any input in these assessments. So can you just walk us through how you're doing the assessment?
Absolutely. So some of the logistics are still being developed, and the goal is to really outsource the individual or the actual facilitator of the assessment. We want it to be as impartial as possible. And the goal is really to facilitate everything we outline in the future RFP to guide seat placement. So what we plan to do is coordinate engagement with families and communities to understand exactly that, right? Their needs and their wants. I always like to say childcare is chosen based on proximity and price, right? So understanding if that proximity is to their workplace or to their home. And understanding that costs for a full day seat, full day as defined by their work day, if they are a working family, not by the school day, is also some prioritizations that we want to include. And then also providers, right? We have to look at their ability, their capacity to offer that care. To my colleague's point, it's not just about the demand, but also the supply, and understanding what they need to operationalize that care for families. We plan, again, to do that prior to placing seats, right? We really want to steep all of this in communities, by communities, and we have to engage with them. And that's also at the crux of the blueprint. It talks about our collaboration, which is huge. We need to talk to each other. We need to streamline services and supports, create efficiencies so we can work in support and centered around family needs. Additionally, in the blueprint, it does outline metrics and indicators. We plan on tracking our progress throughout. This is not, saying we set a goal and hopefully one day we'll attain it. We are comprehensively and collaboratively going to work together on our shared goals, on our individual goals that are assigned to each agency to ensure that we are creating milestones to achieve them. If we falter in any way, that we adjust accordingly. And we're doing that, again, centered around families, children, and provider voices, and ensuring that we adjust as necessary.
Thank you. And if I could just make a suggestion, please
Absolutely.
utilize our offices, because we're getting the complaints that we didn't know about this assessment. These are our families, and we want to make sure that we're engaging our parents as much as possible in this process. So, excuse me, if you could just please engage the council member's office so we could actually get it to the right community groups within our community that can actually execute this assessment.
Invitation received.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Another thing, the purpose of this blueprint is to reach the possibility of universal childcare. Does the administration have a projected year, date that we could see that we will achieve this, or we're just trying to figure it out right now?
I would say not at this time, but certainly, we'll figure out the pace. And I think there's so much to learn in the first 2 years, which is why we want a cautious and intentional, but still aggressive and ambitious start. And lessons learned will be able to give us a better sense of when. But the partnership is not just us. Well, let me say it this way. We need the partnership of state and federal government to get there.
Correct.
And so we know it's not us alone. What we're trying to do here is leverage the mayor's influence, certainly, and work with our system so that we are ready and we've prepared our base to then showcase what we can do. And I just want to underscore that we don't intend to do this without partnership with the city council members. You're really critical partners at the table too.
Thank you. And my last question, facilities for families with children with disabilities is a real challenge. Even public spaces for children with disabilities, just having access to resources. Do you have a number or estimate of how many facilities within each council district support children with disabilities?
We don't have that number, but I certainly would say we are bound by the federal ADA laws. And so, but let's get to that number. At the Commission on Gender Equity, we think a lot about intersectionality, and disability or physical and mental challenges are one of those critical issues as well. So we're going to get to the number and get that back to you, but in principle, we need to be there, and we agree with you, and thanks for raising that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I'll pass it to Councilmember Richardson Jordan.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the testimony. I wanted to ask a question, and it was touched on by our Chair, and I know you spoke already about the incoming 40 staffers, but I wanted to ask specifically about technical assistance for those who are looking to become providers or those who need help with filling out the applications for support. So what does that technical assistance look like currently? Is it workshops? Or is there any one-on-one support?
You mean technical assistance for people who want to become child care providers or for the background clearance? So we provide a huge amount of technical assistance. We have a lot of written guidance materials. We provide one-on-one consultations. We offer webinars. And that is, I want to just break down your question a little bit because we do that specifically for the background clearance paperwork. We've done a lot of that and we'll continue to do it. And we also do that for providers generally, or providers to be, to learn about the things they need to do to become providers and the paperwork that they need to complete. It's an important question, and I thank you for raising that.
Okay, awesome. It sounds like some really great stuff happening there. Is that the same for, or will that be the same for receiving support when we're talking about like this child care fund, or we're talking about subsidy?
So there are a couple of different ways that we need to support providers. You've heard about how providers are supported in sort of the licensed and regulated space, but to receive vouchers, that's a whole nother sort of set of sign up and paperwork. Our office at ACS works closely with providers that are interested in becoming providers that accept subsidy childcare vouchers. We know that as we expand, we really need to ramp up that work. We are developing a strategy in partnership with CUNY's Professional Development Institute that does a lot of professional development and support with providers to also assist us in educating, training, and providing technical assistance to providers so that they are ready to go when a family comes to them with a voucher.
Okay, awesome. I also had a question just from something that was touched on earlier in the conversation around the tax credit for employers who are providing childcare services on their sites. Do we have a sense of how much how much that will be in terms of the tax revenue and how many kids it would cover? Do we have numbers on that?
We'll have to check with our partners at City Hall in Deputy Mayor Wright's office to see if we have that information.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask a few more questions about the blueprint. I'm glad the administration is prioritizing lower costs for families. A 1% copayment, as laid out in the blueprint released yesterday, is going to put hundreds of dollars, back in working families' pockets. I am concerned, however, about the steep benefit cliff this creates for families with incomes just over the 300% of poverty who are not eligible for assistance. So, like, for instance, say I'm a mom in a family of 3, and our income goes from $68,000 a year to, say, $70,000 a year. According to the blueprint, I would go from paying $680 a year for care to being entirely on the hook for tuition, facing costs upwards of $10,000 to $20,000 a year. And we know from years of research on the utilization of public benefits the perverse impact this can have, with families turning down promotions so as not to lose their benefits. And so now parents are going to make the best choices for themselves and their families, but what's the city's plan for addressing that cliff?
I will say that today we are bound by, because the vast majority of our money is through federal and state dollars, we are bound and constrained by the laws and regulations. And so we do need to think about and deal with those families that just tip over, because today we are not able to offer a voucher or an early learn seat to a family that is above that threshold, based on our statutory constraints.
And so what does some of that planning look like? Have y'all been talking about what potential solutions could be to address that?
We're in constant conversation with our partners with OMB, and thinking about what advocacy can look like, but we don't have a strategy today. As I mentioned, we have sort of erased the cliff at the 200% federal poverty level in implementing the 300%, but of course, each time you push upstream, you then have another difficult threshold, especially again, given costs in New York City.
Is the administration seriously considering, filling that gap or addressing that problem with city funding? With city funding, right? Is the administration, seriously considering saying, hey, we recognize that this is a real problem, and we can put city dollars towards this? Can we get some statement of this is a commitment in terms of it being a budgetary priority to address or anything like that?
It's something that we need to discuss with our partners and with OMB.
Okay. Yeah, again, my personal position is that certainly it would be, worthy of us putting our city dollars there and maybe taking them from some other places to make sure that our families are provided with access to the child care that they need. What's the administration's position on work requirements for subsidized child care, and would the city be willing to supplement state and federal funding to serve families who don't meet the current strict work requirements?
I think I just want to share that one of the bills we that's awaiting the governor's signature is delinking childcare from the hours a parent works and participates in qualifying activities like training and school. So we really are interested in creating greater flexibility, and in so doing, we also recognize that there'll be other needs and other gaps that result, right? And so this is a process. We do not come to this with all the answers. We probably have identified more problems and challenges, but I want to talk about the spirit and the intent behind the blueprint as being solution-oriented and being innovative and fostering collaboration, not just amongst our agencies, but across sectors. We're leveraging philanthropic partners, bringing to the table. Robin Hood has already invested a significant sum, 50 million, I think. 100 million, I thought it was combined, we were 100. So 50 million, and combined the city, we're at 100 million. And so more of that is likely to happen. The beauty of this work is that we will be intentional. We will, because we have a continuum, because we have a multiplicity of voices at the table, always looking for gaps in stakeholders and issues, I think we have a better chance of steering towards a seamless and integrated provision and arriving at, of childcare services and arriving at universal healthcare. Universal childcare, I'm sorry, got my universals mixed up. Universal childcare.
Thank you. And yeah, I just want to say, like, I'm really proud of the fact that the city stepped up and filled a very real gap when the state did not provide, when the federal provisions do not allow for certain funds to be used, for example, for undocumented childcare, right? And the state said, hey, we're going to kick in that $10 million to make sure that this happens. And so again, I just want to put forth that, like, that, using our city dollars in that way just obviously pays dividends when we talk about just the overall health and safety of every single individual in our city. And so would love to see, you know, more of the admin saying, hey, this is how we're gonna use our budget dollars, because this is where our priority is, and really making sure that the blueprint is a funded mandate, and that we're willing to do whatever it takes to get those dollars there to meet those benchmarks. I want to ask a little bit about supporting providers. I know that my colleague started asking a bit about this, but you know, the mayor's child care and early childhood education blueprint, which obviously we've been talking a lot about it. One of the things it mentions is the importance of increasing business support to build the provider capacity and ensure sustainability. And again, I know talked about some of the technical assistance and workshops and things. But specifically, I know New York City is leaning more heavily on home-based childcare providers than ever before. Home-based providers offer the benefits of flexible hours, accessibility, cultural compatibility with some of our youngest children and their families. That's true. I definitely applaud those efforts as we're trying to address this crisis. But can you please describe what the city is doing now to support daycare workers and families who cannot afford care? It seems like many of the mayor's proposals address the pipeline, right, of issue, but what's the administration doing to support and serve childcare providers, including those in privately run centers now?
So I can't speak to private run programs. I can only speak to those that are affiliated with the DOE, particularly those contracted and contracted care, as we do have district-run settings that are in public schools or pre-K centers. But one of the major areas that is included in the blueprint is workforce development, further professionalizing the field, compensation equity, right? We have to acknowledge that if we want to run childcare and have care, particularly early childhood education, we have to build up and support early childhood educators. And in order to do that, and considering the diverse amount of settings that childcare is provided in, creating a more healthy competition, right, that again provides parent choice, but doesn't create an unhealthy competition that puts folks out of business. And that's identifying, again, areas where we can increase salaries, provide support so families, those working as child care educators, can sustain their living as they support others to go to work, attend school, and build up this economy. But I do think one of the things that you are identifying here, Chair, is that this is just the beginning of the conversation. This work is not happening at anyone, it's happening with us. And I think these type of conversations, this type of thought partnership is necessary to further build out how we plan to implement this plan.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask a question about space assessment and reporting. I know that the plan also mentions conducting the citywide space assessment for childcare needs. The last time that the city did a similar assessment and issued a report on childcare pursuant to Local Law 183 of 2018, or as part of former public advocate Tish James' legislation to provide, the city essentially concluded that it was already meeting and need by providing information on the Early Learn program and Universal 3K and K. And so my question is, how will this assessment be different?
I'm going to ask you to repeat that one more time. I'm
Sure.
So sorry.
Specifically about the space assessment and reporting that's included in the blueprint plan. So the last time the city did a similar assessment of need and issued a report on childcare, and that was pursuant to Local Law 183 of 2018, and also as part of former public advocate Tish James' legislation to provide childcare for city workers. At the end of those, the city essentially concluded that it was already meeting mandates and need by providing information and options related to Early Learn program and Universal 3K and pre-K. And so my question is, how will this assessment that's outlined in the blueprint be different?
So the assessment done in 2018 was about the city's workforce and being able to provide it. And typically, I think the suggestion was to look for buildings here, city-owned buildings, to be able to retrofit in order to provide childcare services. The cross-city group that got together recognized that our workers can also access existing services. Because of the expense associated with retrofitting space that we couldn't necessarily guarantee would be optimized in terms of utilization. So that for us became a huge concern, right? So we would be creating space, and then the episodic use of it would create financial burdens. That was the concern as we worked through this. The other factor was we recognized that many of our workers were eligible for the services, and the idea of some of them may want these services closer to home than to work. So there was a lot of balance and nuance that went into that report. I would say there's likely to be great difference. I think the population we're talking about is beyond the city's workforce. This is city's workforce plus all New Yorkers with children who need services. I also think we've just gone through a pandemic. And are still going through a pandemic, as Elizabeth underscores, that there are so many different effects and layers that this is a very different time than 2018. This is also a very different effort. The nature of this effort is broader in scope than what was done in 2018. Clearly more ambitious, clearly grounded in the need of New Yorkers and our youngest New Yorkers. So I do think we expect different results. And that report we did was really the voice of city workers. This will be the voice of New Yorkers in communities, high-need communities identified. So there's a real discipline and intentionality put to this one that's much broader in scope than the first one. However, we certainly can learn from that first report and will leverage it as appropriate.
Thank you. And I know Councilmember Gutierrez has some follow-ups. Yeah, go for it.
It's heavy. Thank you, Chair. My question, the following one might be something that's very specific to my district. What I found is that a good amount of our daycare centers are in my NYCHA developments. And that what we have found, as specifically in Brooklyn, we are home of some of the oldest NYCHA developments. They are, I guess, on the pathway to getting NORC designation. So I'm specifically talking about Cooper Park, which is in the Williamsburg portion of my district. Sheltering Arms was the provider there, and that daycare center has remained closed. And so in these instances where these daycare centers are in whether or not they're NYCHA or not, but whether or not they're in a NORC site, for example. And maybe there just like isn't enough children anymore. What happens to this facility space? What is the administration looking at with with respect to the blueprint, but just with respect to the fact that we are in dire need overall as a city for universal childcare? What happens to this facility space in this instance?
I think that's at the core of the space assessment, is looking at space that is already being utilized, right? Primed and ready, retrofitted, outfitted to support childcare is based on the variety of childcare regulations that really guide space requirements, some at the local level and some at the state level. So looking at that to see if with the existing provider can expand within that space, right? For which ages, upward or down, because again, and I won't go into the details, there are restrictions based on age and floors, but also looking at other available community spaces, maybe NYCHA or other. I think what you heard today is we're not restricting those spaces to city-owned or city-leased spaces, but really encouraging private developers to consider housing childcare in those facilities. So again, I would say looking at NYCHA or any other community center space run by the city or state is opportunity for us to consider opening up childcare.
I understand that. I think, so my question is, where there's an aging population, how can we preserve these spaces for the need of child? Do you know what I mean? Like for the need of childcare. I think maybe I'm not.
No, you're clear, council member, and I think this is exactly the nature of the issue, right? Because if we're lucky, we age. If
Right.
we're lucky, we get older. And I'm not going to be facetious now. If we're lucky, we get older. And so what happens is the young people move out, and you tend to have a naturally occurring retiring district, so older people. And I think we have to look at that issue because, again, not because it's a NORC now means that it's going to be a NORC in 5-10 years, right? So this is the nimbleness, and I think it's the opportunity we'll have, which we may have missed in earlier times in the city, to really understand how do we assure that spaces don't go
That's right.
unused and respond to the needs of the community as it currently exists, but is also prepared to address future needs, right? And we don't have an answer now, but that is the problem.
On your
And
radar.
as you have articulated, and thank you for raising it, because this is something we're going to look at.
Yeah, it's real, so I
okay.
appreciate that. My last two questions, one is if you can just specify, for me, because I don't actually know, if you can talk to me a little bit about what are the work requirements that childgivers or parents have to provide first. And then my second question is, through this council budget, there's a sizable amount of money allocated for undocumented families to receive access to childcare. Can you all share what is the documentation that's being asked of these families in order to enroll their children? And will a childcare provider taking in an undocumented family feel a difference in the way that they have to enroll that child? Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So the requirements for state and federally funded care, so distinct from the city-funded program that we're building for children that are undocumented, requires that a caregiver, or in a two-caregiver household, both caregivers are working 10 hours per week or are in qualified school or training, are unhoused. Families that are experiencing homelessness don't need to prove those requirements, or are looking for work. We are so grateful for the opportunity to be able to serve children that are undocumented or have other immigration status that does not qualify them for state and federally funded subsidy. That said, we are building this from scratch, so we have not yet fully defined what documentation will be required. Our goal is that they can access the child care marketplace seamlessly as any other parent and caregiver would, meaning that the voucher that they receive will not be distinct, but we are thinking very critically specifically about what it looks like for those families to come and apply. We understand the vulnerability, we understand how critical it is to make sure that immigration status and information remains confidential, and we're working closely with our city counterparts and are having conversations with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs to make sure that we build this in a way that is safe for families and gives them the seamless access that they need to childcare.
And I actually want to follow up I want to follow up on those questions. You trying to get on the highway, Jim? I can't say this enough, but like I'm grateful to the administration and really proud to have worked with, you know, my colleagues and especially Councilmember Hanif and our comptroller to advance the campaign to extend that childcare to undocumented children, and certainly so glad to see its inclusion. But in addition to the questions that were just asked about it, I also would like to know a little bit about how you're planning to conduct outreach to immigrant communities to ensure they're aware of this new option. And then, you know, in addition to my question and also to the questions that were just posed, like what are you hoping that we can do, the council can do to help with all of those efforts?
So the outreach strategy is what we are building now. You know, again, we are building this from the ground up, so I can't say that we are there today with knowing exactly what this is going to look like, but we are moving as quickly as we can to build that so that we can start issuing vouchers and getting them in the hands of families. I think it's really critically important that we stay connected. You know the communities you work in well, and we need to make sure that we are having conversations and working in lockstep, and again, doing this in a way where families understand that this resource is available to them, feel safe applying for this resource, and that we can, as quickly as possible, make sure that we're connecting them to care. So I think the ask is just to keep the conversation open.
Oh, sorry. And then again, just knowing throughout that process how we as the council can help execute that plan. Thank you. So I want to ask about interagency collaboration and resources. I know that in 2018, CGE launched the Gender Equity Interagency Partnership that consists of senior level leaders throughout New York City agencies. Has childcare been a topic of consideration by the partnership? Are there plans for it to become one? And I want to ask a couple more questions related to this. I know that earlier this year, the city announced the creation of a new mayoral office devoted broadly to equity, or the Mayor's Office for Gender Equity, MOE. What role will this new office play in convening or working with the partnership? And then finally, to tie it all together, according to press releases, the MOE utilizes an intersectional approach to equity and includes the CGE, the Racial Justice Commission, the Pay Equity Cabinet, the Unity Project, the Young Men's Initiative, and the Task Force on Racial Inclusion and Equity. And together, this body of offices and commissions will engage New York's diverse communities and constituencies to create transformative change, right? So can you describe the relationship between CGE and the head of MOE also?
Right. So let me start with the structure, your last question first. The Mayor's Office of Equity is the umbrella entity that is now, to which CGE now reports, and has other offices within it, right? So CGE is the Commission on Gender Equity. You just itemize the others, Young Men's Initiative, the Racial Justice Commission. It's an attempt for us to get the continuum of equity and working collaboratively to ensure that we address the multiple facets of equity using an intersectional lens. Within that, we each, if you will, this is a horrible word, but we each sort of have our primary responsibilities based on charter, right? The CGE, Local Law 45, 2020, gives CGE its core responsibilities. We developed the Gender Equity Interagency Partnership to foster collaboration across agencies. There are two things we look at when we do that. We want to be able to look inward. How, as a city, are we developing gender equitable policies and practices that affect our workforce and advance the well-being of our workforce. So that's one part of the work. The other part of the work is how do we serve New Yorkers in a gender equitable way, right? Regrettably, we took a hard hit in 2019 and during the pandemic with the work of this partnership. The partnership, in fact, had developed an action plan, and when COVID happened, CGE lost about 60% of its staff. So we are now, thankfully, at a stage where we're being restored and expanded. We have a deputy executive director for strategic learning and capacity building, whose primary role is to manage that partnership across city agencies. We're getting that unit staffed up. And so we'll be looking at what does the workforce need in order to be equitable, and from an intersectional gender lens, and how do we serve New Yorkers, right, in a gender equitable fashion. So that's the vision. The Mayor's Office of Equity sits above these broader, these 5 or 6 areas, and creates synergy. And we want to be able to tell that equity story in a seamless manner. And that's so. And there'll be broader initiatives that then the Mayor's Office of Equity will lead.
And has childcare been a topic of consideration by the partnership to date, or are there plans for it to become one?
I'm sorry.
Has childcare been a topic of consideration by this partnership? I know that some of the work was interrupted by the continuing pandemic. So
Right.
if it hasn't, are there some concrete plans
So
for it to become one?
I would say when CGE was a member of the group that worked on the childcare task force under former public advocate Tish James's legislation, and so we will continue to be able to look at that issue. It will surface in many ways. It is not an issue at this point in time, but I should also say the Mayor's Office of Equity reports to the Deputy Mayor of Strategic Initiatives, which is also housing the childcare work. So you can see the natural synergies occurring here structurally. And we can, we're all partnering together, and we're certainly going to carry this. I want to also point out that the Commission on Gender Equity, in its economic mobility and opportunity portfolio, identified caregiving as a major disruptor to economic mobility for women and trans individuals, cis women and trans individuals. And so we see that as a disruptor to wealth building and to asset building. And that has great implications for folks as they age. And so that's one of our priorities, that we really want to look at how we ensure that caregiving does not disrupt the earning potential and the wealth building opportunity given our capitalist society, which can lead to greater security in older age. So that's sort of one of the priorities.
Thank you.
And we don't know yet how we're getting at it.
And I want to shift a little bit and ask you some budget-related questions. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think a little bit earlier in your testimony you mentioned the new child care office.
Right.
And so can you give me budget info and structure and the anticipated structure for that new office?
Could you repeat the last part?
For this new child care office, can you provide budget information and the structure, the anticipated structure of that office?
We do not have that yet, but we can get that to you. I will say that we anticipate the office will be launched at the end of the calendar year, so we can certainly get to you as we work towards that.
And to be fully transparent, right? Like, the basis or the prompt for the question is like wanting to discern whether or not this new office is like, people just wearing more hats, or whether there's going to be like actual separate resources put into this office to execute a particular
I just
function.
want to underscore the mayor's commitment to get stuff done. So it's going to be about getting stuff done and not more hats.
So
we want to make sure we get the hats that are necessary to get stuff done.
Well, I would appreciate some concrete budget numbers and
Yes.
a mapping of what the structure looks like when y'all have it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chairwoman, we will.
Does DOE have estimates for how much it would cost to provide a seat in a childcare program for every 3-year-old in the city, and then also every child aged 5 and under?
We're actually reviewing those per child costs now. I can get back to you with the child per cost by age.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And what's the status of the 1-year pilot program to provide or subsidize a child care center or centers for children of city employees who are 4 years old or younger and are not eligible for universal pre-K, or are 3-year-olds and younger but are not eligible for 3K where 3K services are available?
I'm so sorry. May you ask that one more time?
Yes.
I am so sorry.
What's the status of the 1-year pilot program to provide or subsidize a child care center or centers for children of city employees who are 4 years old or younger and are not eligible for universal pre-K, or 3 years old and younger but not eligible for 3K where 3K services are available?
Can we get back to you on that, Councilmember?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll move into Learning Bridges. What's the current status of the Learning Bridges program? Does it still exist in any capacity? What's the total budget for Learning Bridges? And is the DOE providing funding in DYCD's budget or any budget for any other programs? And if so, how much and from what funding source are those funds coming through?
I will have to get back to you with those details.
Okay. Should we follow up in writing with some of those, or? Yeah, okay. Moving into mental health needs, what ways is the city supporting the mental health needs of children who have had to endure the pandemic? Do you provide services through daycare programs, and in what ways is the city supporting the mental health needs of New York City families whose children who choose to use privately run or center-run daycare centers and schools?
Councilmember, let me preface this by saying we, as a city, understand the importance of being responsive to the mental health challenges that certainly have arisen through the pandemic, and some which clearly predated the pandemic. At this time, to respond to your specific question, we don't have that information, but we will be happy to get back to you with the response.
Thank you. Thank you. Have you considered replicating existing childcare provision systems with a track record of quality and positive outcomes, particularly the U.S. Department of Defense's military childcare programs? It's the largest employer-sponsored childcare program in the country, and it's lauded for its consistent high quality. And so have you considered a small-scale replication pilot? Like, what models or programs did the city consider or evaluate in creating its blueprint? You know, one of the defining and positive features of the Department of Defense's system is uniform. It's consistently enforced quality standards that contribute, you know, towards addressing the racial and socioeconomic disparities in quality of childcare. It has a set of similar uniform standards been contemplated at all? And what would be the barriers to designing, negotiating, and implementing one?
In doing this research, in this work, clearly I think we learned from what New York City has been doing, we learned from what others have done, the body, and to shape the work of the blueprint. I can't state specifically at this time what we used as our base or the information that we gathered, but New York City itself has an extensive record in trying to build out care for 0 to 5-year-olds, recognizing the tremendous uniqueness and wealth of our city in the diversity of our population. You know, I'm going to point to the work that we're doing with undocumented New Yorkers, children, not likely to be present in the Department of Defense and their work with childcare, right? So I think we learn from where we think they're good work, and then we also recognize our uniqueness, and build a model based on those two pieces of information at a minimum coming together. But I can get back to you specifically on what successful models we looked at in order to build out the work in the blueprint.
Yeah, I would be deeply interested in knowing sort of what models were explored and discussed and you know, sort of what the assessments were in terms of their applicability and relatability to, you know, our city and our families' needs are. Okay, so I want to move into young folks with developmental delays and disabilities. The blueprint mentions the importance of identifying children with developmental delays or disabilities early in life, but it doesn't include any plans to better serve children with developmental delays or disabilities in childcare and early childcare programs. The city has a legal obligation to provide 0 to 5-year-olds, so 5 and under children with disabilities, with the special education programs and services that they need. And the parents of children with disabilities need to work just like other parents. And so in a recent poll of New York City parents of young children, 1 in 3 parents indicated that their child had been turned away from a center or home-based childcare program because the provider could not offer enough support for a child with a disability. And earlier this year, the DOE was projecting a shortage for this spring of more than 900 seats in legally mandated preschool special education programs that have smaller classes taught by a special education teacher for preschoolers with more significant disabilities, with a disproportionate shortage in the Bronx. And so as a result, hundreds of children with autism and other complex disabilities have been sitting at home without the instruction or services they need or are entitled to. And so my questions relating to that is, you know, do you know, as of the last day of school, how many children were still waiting for a seat in a legally mandated preschool special education class? And then also in recent years, the city has chosen to open tens of thousands of seats in 3K and pre-K general education programs, and the new blueprint states that over the next 2 years, the city will increase access to childcare for more than, you mentioned this, the more than 41,000 children. However, it doesn't say anything about addressing the shortage of preschool special education classes. And so why is the city able to open tens of thousands of general education seats, but unable to end the shortage of legally mandated preschool special education classes for children with more significant needs? And will the city commit to ending the shortage of preschool special education classes and ensuring that there's a seat for every child whose IEP mandates a special education class for the upcoming school year?
Thank you so much for that question, Councilmember. And I think you're identifying an issue that we have touched upon but have not provided sufficient detail. I do want to say that we were prepared to speak to you about the pieces of legislation right now. And so what we'd like to do is come back to you regarding the specific question. It is a critically important issue. We want to make sure that all our children are served in New York City. And so if you just give us the opportunity, we will return with a response regarding students with developmental delays and other disabilities.
Thank you. I think we will follow up in writing on a couple more questions related to that. I can go into some of the. Yeah. Okay. So particularly in relation to Intro 477, does the administration foresee any issues with the appointment process in forming the task force or meeting of any of the deadlines required by the bill as drafted? Yes, that's the establishing the child care task force. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we want to offer there is to enter into discussion with you regarding the relationship of the two task forces that 477 and 486 recommend. And so we really want to assess whether the advisory board that will be created through the blueprint is in some way related to the purpose and goals of the two proposed task forces. We certainly see as a value add the importance of streamlining these actions so that we are not becoming overladen with task forces and can really be focused on accomplishing the work. If that's, and so we're simply saying we'd love to talk with you more about this.
And Councilmember Menon?
Great. Thank you so much. So just to clarify, so my bill is for an advisory board, so not a task force. There is another bill for a task force, but I just want to distinguish it because the purpose of the advisory board is really to create an entity that has both the responsibility, the duty, the power to legally create policy, recommendations, initiatives. It would have appointees designated by the mayor, the speaker, the controller, the public advocate. So it is an actual board, an actual entity. So I just want to make sure that that is clear.
No, thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
All right, thank you. Okay, there are no further questions for the administration. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So at this
Forward
point,
to continuing dialogue. Okay.
thank you so much. At this time, we will move to public testimony in that portion of the hearing. We do have one person here for in-person testimony. That person is Eliana Gaidi from Literacy NYC. Apologies for any mispronunciation. So we'll just take 2 minutes. If that witness can approach the table, we'll take several minutes and then we'll move to public testimony. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Hi.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. So we are using a 2-minute clock. For those in the room, there's a clock on the wall. And you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock. We'll just begin in 1 moment. So we'll do an in-person panel, and then we'll go to a remote panel on the televisions.
Great. Yeah, I can start? Sure.
Yes, you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Great. I thank you, Councilmember Caban, for chairing this hearing. I thank the members of the committee and the members who have put forth legislation. We at Literacy Inc. commend the council for tackling the challenges of childcare from many different directions. This is a multifaceted problem. Please consider one more dimension: early literacy training for licensed family daycare providers. My name is Eliana Godoy, Deputy Director of Literacy Inc. LINC, an acronym that also describes what we do. We link families with young children to literacy resources in their own community. We also facilitate the Council's only early literacy initiative, Cities First Readers. New York City is missing a golden opportunity by not including early literacy training as part of the licensing process for family daycare providers. We leave a vacuum where we could in fact have deep impact. Licensed family daycare providers are required to take training that, quite rightly, emphasizes the safety and well-being of children in their care. But unlike their counterparts at Head Start or ACS daycare centers, they're not trained in early literacy. Childcare offered in a provider's own home is the most common childcare arrangement for young children from low-income families. 90% of the brain development takes place during their first 5 years of life, but children in family daycare settings may not receive the same stimulation as children whose caregivers are trained in early literacy and education. We must seize this moment with its focus on early childhood to provide quality program to all children. It is not an expensive proposition to help licensed family daycare providers turn their small businesses settings into a word-rich environment. Provider training, kits of low-tech materials to label household items in multiple languages. I ran out of time. Essentially, the most important part is that 90% of the brain development happens from 0 to 5. This is a critical opportunity, and if we're talking about equity in education, it starts in the first 5 years. We have a really good opportunity to not just present access and affordability, but to look at quality as part of the important factor that makes sure that our kids are starting successfully, right? So we have a golden opportunity, and at Literacy Inc., we would love to provide any assistance that we can in providing training or access to literacy resources to home daycare providers who are licensed in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. We'll now read the members of the next panel. This panel is remote. We'll read all the names, and council members, if they have questions, we'll ask at the end of the panel. The members of panel 2 will be Lisa Zucker from the New York Civil Liberties Union, Chris Bennett from Wonder School, and Stephen Morales from All Our Kin. Just wait one moment, please, Ms. Zucker, and we will begin.
Starting time.
Oh, apologies, you may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Okay, thank you.
Starting time.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Zucker, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a senior attorney for legislative affairs at the New York Civil Liberties Union. Thank you for allowing us to testify today. To the extent that the council's proposed bills address the need for a coordinated and high-quality childcare system, NYCLU is in support. As the City Council acts on this package, however, it must ensure that any new system is truly accessible for all New Yorkers and does not unintentionally harm the very families it aims to serve. To the latter point, notwithstanding all the good people who work at the Administration for Children's Services, NYCLU is strongly opposed to an administrative structure with ACS at the head, and our testimony today will be limited to that sole issue. NYCLU has long viewed state intervention in the family as a civil liberties issue and has been involved in matters relating to the child welfare system for nearly 50 years. In the 70s, we brought litigation against the city that led to a settlement spurring significant changes to the foster system. We also appeared as amicus in the landmark case Nicholson versus Scapetta, defending the parental rights of mothers who are domestic violence survivors. ACS's primary role as the administrator of child protective services make it ill-suited to serve as the agency charged with the implementation and oversight of childcare. More than 70,000 New York City children are investigated by ACS in a typical year. For many families, those investigations are as traumatic as a visit from the police. ACS has the power to conduct intrusive searches, conduct extensive questioning where everything a parent says can be used against them in court, and in the most dire cases can separate youth from their parents without judicial approval. The disparate racial impact of the system are such that 90% of the children named in investigations placed in foster care and with open cases are Black or Latinx. Poverty also drives a family's involvement with ACS. The vast majority of family separations, oops, sorry, I will finish up.
Please finish up. That's okay.
Poverty is one of the main reasons for contact with the family regulation system, not from abuse, but from alleged neglect, which ironically can include things like lack of childcare. Families living below the poverty line are 22 times more likely to be involved in family regulation. Because of these devastating consequences, it is not surprising that families will view ACS as a threat rather than an agency to turn to for support. Even the ACS Commissioner, Jess Danhauser, acknowledged this in 2021 when she said families experience the support as surveillance. And no matter our intention, the experience is what matters. Instead of administering childcare through ACS, NYCLU urges the City Council to create, as we have heard, an Office of Early Care and Education that is separate and independent from ACS. Childcare is a public responsibility that must be accessible to all, cannot result in trauma that has been documented by the family involvement with ACS. Now is the time for New York City to act, and New York City is perfectly situated to take that action in a big and bold way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next witness will be Chris Bennett from Wonder School. You may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Starting time.
Hello, Committee Chair Caban, Council Member Manine, and the members of City Council. My name is Chris Bennett, and I am the founder and CEO of Wonder School, a childcare technology and services company that helps stabilize the childcare industry by providing business management and enrollment demand tools to childcare providers, specifically home-based childcare providers, and by creating recruiting, licensing, and supporting brand new childcare programs. As a technology company, we have seen the tremendous impact technology and data tools can have on supporting providers, connecting families and programs, and helping state and local agencies make informed decisions about where to allocate support and resources. We support the child care bill package the City Council has put forth. Based on our work and experience, there are two specific bills we would like to highlight as critical methods for improving child care options for families and providers in New York City. First, Intro 485 proposes the creation of an electronic child care directory, providing information to families about open programs is a critical way for childcare providers to fill their programs. Today's parents are technology natives who have grown up searching for information on their own, but most database tools are challenging to navigate. A single electronic directory would make it easier for families to find childcare that meets their needs. Childcare providers often struggle to market their programs, which means they cannot always fill their programs. Full program enrollment is one of the key drivers of childcare income and profitability, and making childcare information easily available to families helps keep programs full and ensures the childcare landscape is sustainable for years to come. Finally, Intro 487 proposes that the city create an online portal for subsidy program information. For many families, subsidized childcare is the only way to afford care and find employment, but it can be confusing for families to navigate this process and understand the programs that they may qualify for. Digitizing the process saves time for family. I'm sorry?
You can wrap up your statement.
Okay. Digitizing this process saves time for families and the agencies who review their applications, makes the information more accessible, and provides more options for support like translation services to support families. An electronic subsidy portal will help more families benefit from these programs while providing back-end data to the city in hopes of reaching as many families and providers as possible. In closing, I'd like to reiterate our support for this childcare legislation and look forward to seeing the impact the council will have on childcare in New York City in the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll now move to the next witness on this panel. Mr. Stephen Morales from All Our Kin. You may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Starting time.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Morales. I'm the New York Policy Director at All Our Kin. All Our Kin is a nonprofit organization that supports hundreds of family childcare educators across New York City with relationship-based licensing, business, and educational quality coaching. Thank you, Chair Caban and members of this committee for recognizing and taking on the childcare crisis facing families and educators in our city. I want to share some brief suggestions grounded in 3 key principles: a comprehensive approach to care for children from birth to 5, reducing fragmentation in our childcare system, and placing equity and the voices of families and educators at the center of city policymaking. This is particularly important for the city's 6,000 home-based family childcare programs whose expertise has frequently been overlooked. We recommend consolidating the Child Care Task Force and Advisory Board into one and explicitly including family child care providers and the parents they serve. This will ensure that the committee's work reflects the wide range of high-quality childcare options in our city. We support the council making it easier for families to access information about childcare options. To streamline, we recommend that the subsidy portal and directory be consolidated into one platform and coordinated across the multiple agencies that fund childcare in our city and our state. This will give families a true one-stop shop. Legislation should also make the portal available in families' home language, ensure phone or in-person consultation remains available for families who prefer it, and include parents and providers in the design process. Finally, we're excited by the council's proposed child care program fund, and we recommend further clarifying the fund's goal. To support the workforce, the council should provide a wage supplement for employees and family child care providers. To prevent program closures, the council should increase funding and develop an equitable formula that makes targeted grants available before closure becomes a significant risk. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. All Our Kin is here as a partner and collaborator as we continue to recognize and support home-based family child care educators in our city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Julie, do you have any questions? Okay. Thank you. I'd just like to say, thank you to Ms. Zucker at NYC, at NYCLU. I take your concerns very seriously. As a former public defender, I'm absolutely, intimately aware of many families' relationship to and interactions with ACS, and so that is a very critical and valid concern. Would love to stay in conversation about that. Thank you to Mr. Bennett for your testimony, and Mr. Morales, thank you for all of your suggestions as well. Appreciate y'all coming out to testify.
This concludes panel 2. We'll now move to panel 3. I'll be reading the names of the 3 members on the panel, and then starting with the first. Elvin Sahin, again, apologies for any mispronunciations, Erica Brewington, and Julian Klein. Please also note that written testimony can be submitted up to 72 hours after the hearing, and we will be checking for anyone that we inadvertently missed or who has logged off and logs back in after our 4th and final panel. So this is panel 3. The first panelist is Elvin Sahin, and you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Starting time.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Caban and members of the New York City Council Committee on Women and Gender Equity for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Elvan Sahin. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a policy analyst on early childhood education at United Neighborhood Houses. UNH is a policy and social change organization that has 45 settlement houses in its network, 40 of them in New York City. In addition, settlement houses in New York City operate 70 DOE contracted childcare programs. Our testimony today calls on the City Council to pass the package of childcare bills that are presented in this hearing and continue to build on stabilizing and expanding New York City's early education system. I will also be submitting a more detailed written testimony later for the records. We thank council members Menon, Hudson, Gutierrez, and Caban for sponsoring these bills, and also the co-sponsors for the bills. The proposed bills that are under consideration today will bring more accountability, transparency, and clarity to the field of early childhood education on path to achieving universality. We also urge the committee to consider below feedback that we believe applies to the majority of the bills. We suggest coordination with all city agencies that have a stake in the childcare system, like ACS, HMH, DOE, as well as the city hall, and seek feedback from appropriate staff in order to avoid duplicative actions that have the same purposes. Similarly, we also suggest taking into account state and what the state has for these purposes in terms of tools and resources that might serve the similar purposes. We also like to emphasize avoiding putting undue burden on existing providers in order to implement these bills.
Time expired.
And our written testimony also will include more specific feedback in each bill. We also would like to continue stabilizing the system by prioritizing salary parity for all early childhood education staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now move to the final panelist on this panel. There's a small change due to individuals logged in. So we'll move to Julian Klein. You may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Time start now.
Starting time.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Caban and members of the New York City Council. I'm Julian Klein, Head of Policy for Tech NYC. Tech NYC is a nonprofit member-based organization representing over 800 technology companies in New York. We are testifying in support of the Council's package of bills supporting expansion and increased access to childcare, and offer the following recommendations to ensure the successful implementation of these critical proposals. New York City's tech ecosystem has over 25,000 companies and startups. As it continues to grow, affordable and accessible childcare becomes more integral to the success of the industry. For many of the 372,000 tech employees, childcare is a cornerstone of their company benefit packages. They are integral to attracting and retaining talent, as well as fostering sustainable and flexible work environment for working families. Tech NYC supports Intro 477, which would establish a child care task force. We encourage the council and any task force created to take a close look at the costs behind child care centers. Earlier this year, care.com found that 51% of families spend at least 20% of their income on child care, therefore reducing childcare costs would relieve many New Yorkers of a tremendous burden. Child caregivers and employees should be properly compensated, so this is one cost which cannot be reduced. However, we encourage the City Council and any established task force to look creatively into the expenses and costs of childcare and identify areas where savings can be made without reducing the quality or safety of the care. One potential cost-saving measure would be eliminating the requirement for child care centers to be located on the first floor of buildings. Second floor commercial spaces are often lower priced than ground floor spaces. Additionally, they are usually in less demand than higher floor commercial spaces. With the proper safety precautions, the safety and egress for infants and toddlers can still be protected while providing additional real estate options for providers. Tech NYC recommends that the City Council assess the viability and safety of locating child care centers on the second floor of buildings.
Time expired.
Which would lead to more affordable child care. Second, there are numerous existing child care providers and employer tax credits that go unused. This includes a federal tax credit for employer-based child care of up to 35% of expenditures with a 200% match from the state. There's also New York Excelsior job creation tax credit for new child care centers and a personal income tax credit for working parents and those with disabilities. The City Council should explore more educational and public awareness efforts that will increase usage of these credits. Tech NYC also supports the goals of Intro 485 and 487 and Mayor Adams by creating online portals and platforms to make it easier for parents to enroll their children in child care programs. The New York State Office of Children and Family Services and the New York City Department of Health's Child Care Connect websites have several child care listings. However, they are not always easy to use or access on personal mobile devices. New York City's tech community would be happy to assist with identifying digital solutions that would make the city and state's child care platforms easier to use. Tech NYC recommends creating public and private partnerships with our local tech community to revamp some of the government's public-facing resources. Lastly, we support Intro 488, protecting child care providers in danger of being priced out of their locations. We recommend that this bill specifically delineates who is eligible for these grants, so the intended childcare facilities in economic straits receive this financial support they need. Additionally, we recommend the council make use of public data available, including from the most recent census, so that neighborhoods that have seen increases in family and child populations receive the proper consideration during the funding allocation process. Thank you for addressing these important issues, and we are excited to be working with the New York City Council to help make childcare more affordable and accessible for years to come.
Thank you. Thank you both for your testimony.
This concludes this panel. We will now move to panel 4, which is the final panel. We have 2 witnesses, and then we will read the names of those who registered and are not present on Zoom. And if we have inadvertently missed anyone, we'll also check for additional testimony. The last panelist, the 2 witnesses on panel 4 will be Catrice Thomas and Letitia McNeil. Catrice Thomas, you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Starting time.
Vice President for Programs for Non-Traditional Employment for Women, as also known as NEW. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. Women in particular, Black women and brown women are most impacted by economic crises. As you know, women account for up to 54% of coronavirus-related job losses.
Ms. Thomas, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're having technical issues. We can't hear you very well. If it's possible to start again.
Sure, one moment. Is this any better?
Yes, we can hear you clearly now. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Sure. So sorry about the timing, but I began by speaking about women, in particular, Black and brown women, being the most impacted by economic crises. As we all know, women account for up to 54% of coronavirus-related job losses. And in some months of 2020, Black and brown women accounted for all net job losses. NEW offers a holistic, career-oriented solution. NEW prepares, trains, and places low-income women in careers in the skilled construction, utility, and maintenance trades, helping women achieve economic independence and a secure future for themselves and their families. At the same time, NEW provides a pipeline of qualified workers to the unionized industries of New York City. Union representation brings wage setting into the open and helps ensure that employers set wages based on objective criteria such as skill, effort, and responsibility. Unionized women make on average 23% more than women without a union. They are also far more likely to have paid and stronger protections against discrimination and sexual harassment in the workplace. These careers offer financial security with wages of starting out $19 per hour, leading towards a pathway to middle-class wages and benefits through their union. To enter a lucrative and sustainable field like construction, women must have access to resources that address their specific needs in the industry. Since 1978, NEW has been a groundbreaking model that works for women in New York City. Through our programs, we offer students no-cost comprehensive training in both the hard and soft skills needed to thrive in a trade career, including advanced training programs and expanded employer-based wraparound and social services, including non-traditional childcare pilot programs in partnership with the North American Building Trade Unions, and a growing number of opportunities available to women through those employers. 30% of new graduates are single parents and heads of households, in which access to childcare assistance is a challenge. Additionally, 20% of graduates, some 40 people, that are seeking initial trade employment.
You can finish, go ahead.
Thank you. Named childcare and education as the top of their list regarding barriers to employment and entrance into the union. We envision a future where women are equally provided with skills and opportunities needed to succeed in construction trade careers. NEW believes that equitable economic opportunity for tradeswomen means increasing union construction projects in New York City, as well as creating sustainable and sufficient long-term construction by advocating for diversity goals on projects. More than 82% of individuals accessing, accessing whose services identify as minority. Additionally, 80% of women are underemployed working minimum wage jobs, with 75% receiving some form of TANF or public assistance. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're also going to be adding 2 individuals to this panel. So again, this is our final panel. This was Catrice Thomas. The next witnesses will be Letitia McNeil, Gregory Brender, and then Sage Shaftel. Apologies in advance for any mispronunciations. Again, the next witness will be Letitia McNeil, and you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Starting time.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Especially thank you to Julie Menon, my council member. I am a tenant of the Holmes Towers on the Upper East Side on 92nd Street, which is a low-income development within NYCHA. I'm here to testify on an experience that I had within the last week, which is why this panel is so important. I've been searching for universal childcare, affordable childcare for my youngest child for the last couple of years. Sunshine Daycare recently opened up. I went for a tour hoping for some finally for some success, and their rate per month was $3,333. That's more than my rent. That's more than transportation. That's more than I'm making with my salary as a part-time worker. So organizations like this coming in our community, not really servicing us or giving us the opportunity to put our children in safe spaces, and ultimately having us resort to unsafe spaces, to where we are at work trying to make an income, but also still worrying if our children are okay because we can only afford the bare minimum of childcare. So, implementing these laws and getting the childcare universal and getting it to where it needs to be so everyone can benefit from having adequate childcare would be amazing and great. And I'm ready for it to get started for the parents who are coming in behind me, because it's really desperately needed, especially in the low income areas where we're kind of forgotten about. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for your testimony. The next witness will be Gregory Brender. And I just 2 notes. Again, you can submit written testimony up to 72 hours after the hearing to testimony@council.nyc.gov. And council members will also have questions at the end of the panel. There are 4 witnesses. So we're moving to our 3rd witness, Gregory Brender. Thank you.
Starting time.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify. My name is Gregory Brender, and I'm here on behalf of the Daycare Council of New York. We are a membership organization of early childhood education provider organizations throughout New York City. We're really glad that this hearing is happening, and particularly that it's being held by the Committee on Gender and Women and Gender Equity. We recognize that early childhood education is an equity issue for women and for everyone, and also that our workforce, who are primarily women and women of color, are underpaid and underappreciated because of longstanding discrimination against work that is performed primarily by women. And so we hope to see real progress on achieving salary parity for the early childhood workforce. We're going to submit written testimony with individual comments on each of the pieces of legislation and resolutions in consideration today. We do support them, but 2 common themes. One is in task forces and advisory councils, ensuring the inclusion of the diversity of the early childhood field, and also that we are providers of resource and referral for parents looking for childcare. And so working with parents on things, working with resource providers on things like having directories and online portals to ensure that the individual needs of families are met is crucially important. With regards to the general topic of the hearing, we're really excited to see the movement towards universal childcare in New York City. We know that New York needs to expand its childcare system. To do so, we really need to strengthen and stabilize the network of providers that are currently providing education and are often struggling to keep their doors open. 3 key recommendations in this regard. 1, to ensure salary parity for the early childhood workforce, not just teachers, but also directors and support staff, and ensuring all of them have longevity increases like their counterparts in the public schools. Secondly, to
Time expired.
I'll be very quick. The other two recommendations are around enrollment, allowing community-based enrollment, and suspending the pay-for-enrollment system that's currently causing fiscal problems for providers. Thanks again for the opportunity to testify, and we'll have more details in our written testimony.
Thank you.
We'll now move to the final witness on this panel. Sage Sheftel, you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Starting time.
Hi, thank you so much. I serve as Assistant Executive Director for the Early Care and Education Consortium, a national nonprofit comprised of the leading high-quality multi-state, multi-site childcare providers, state childcare associations, and education service providers. Our members operate about 7,000 centers nationwide, serving nearly 1 million children, including 185 centers in New York State and 75 in the city. I wanted to start off by sharing our support for the mayor's new blueprint for childcare and early education and the historic investments planned for the next several years to build a robust and equitable early childhood system. But today I really wanted to focus on one particular issue that's been plaguing the childcare before and after school and summer programming sectors since long before the pandemic, and has only gotten worse. And this is the extreme delays in the processing of criminal background checks for educators and staff in the city. ECEC has partnered with organizations across the city, and it's clear that the delays are by no means limited to the 75 centers we operate, but they're impacted by just about every program that goes through DOHMH. Meanwhile, our country and New York City in particular are facing a massive workforce crisis, which is compounded by the childcare crisis. Background checks are extremely important and play a critical role in ensuring children will be safely cared for. And we're 100% in support of thorough background checks, but the current length of time clearances are taking is undermining providers' ability to provide children with care and is significantly worsening the existing staffing crisis. I know this was discussed earlier in the hearing, but the average wait time is around 7 to 9 months for all of our providers, and many of them are taking over a year to go through the system. And this is causing would-be educators to leave the sector and resulting in classroom closures and a shortening of programs' operational hours, which again impacts working parents' ability to provide care. ECEC providers operate in 48 states and DC. And as I mentioned before, in the state and New York City is significantly taking significantly longer. And we do have a set of recommendations that I've included in written testimony, and we'll share that with all of you afterwards. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I just want to thank you all again, and actually want to work backwards for a second. Ms. Sheffel, thank you. I think we share in your concerns. Both myself and Councilmember Menon asked the administration about this problem. It is quite frankly unacceptable that it is taking this long to get through these background checks. So, I personally, admittedly, was not really all that satisfied with the response that we got, and we'll certainly be following up to see what concrete steps are being taken. Our understanding is that they're bringing on more employees to help, shepherd this along, but it is of deep concern and one that we will continue to follow up on. So thank you. Mr. Brender, thank you. I appreciated, what you said about the workforce being clearly underpaid and underappreciated. Ms. McNeil, thank you for sharing your personal experience. I think your exact experience is exactly why the council has, put forth this package and made it such a priority, because yours is the story of so many New Yorkers around our city. So thank you for sharing that with us. And then I actually had a question for Ms. Thomas. I had the privilege of being able to tour NEW and learn more about the work that NEW is doing to get women and gender expansive folks into non-traditional workplaces like construction. We held in this committee a hearing on women and gender expansive folks in the trades particularly, and in your testimony you mentioned non-traditional childcare pilot programs. So I'm just hoping you could talk just a little bit about what makes what are the unique needs of women in the construction fields in terms of finding childcare on any given day? Ms. Thomas still there?
Any better? I actually have the mask on. I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
That's okay. We can hear you.
Okay. 1 second. So some of the unique challenges are that women, I think overall are feeling uncomfortable about the quality of the providers that they have access to as a result of their low income status in dealing with some of, the voucher programs through the various city agencies. So what they can afford, they're feeling like they deserve a little bit better in terms of quality. And then there is the, once you start working, you're, $1 or $5 over the limit. So, you wind up going from not paying anything or paying a little bit to just as the other panelists brought up, paying $3,000 a month. So, we're finding varying levels of women just being sort of in shock and thinking that union wages are the way to go. And then to get these union wages, which are deemed as good and high in the industry, just to not be able to pay to put your child in daycare.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that I heard from some of your fellow workers in your field in terms of challenges included things like your hours are different. You have to get to a job site, really, really early in the morning, and that limits who's able to take your child in, a provider that accounts for the hours that you work, for example. Or, we've talked a lot today about childcare deserts, and if you are living in a community that is one of those deserts, it's tough because in construction you go from site to site. So while many folks may have an additional option in terms of neighborhood to bring their kids for childcare, because it might be the neighborhood that they work in, the neighborhood of folks in the construction industry, that changes, month to month, year over year. And so I think that there are some really unique challenges that yourself and your colleagues that do the work that you do face. And I think it's something that we'll continue to talk about to make sure that we're accounting for those things as well. So I appreciate all of you bringing your experiences and sharing them. And I know that Councilmember Menon, I believe, had a question as well.
Thank you so much. I really just wanted to close by thanking all of the panelists. I was really moved by all of the comments that I heard today. Incredibly helpful to hear comments, first of all, as Chair Caban said, about the background checks, which we both deeply are concerned about. Also, really productive comments about the website and the electronic database, which we really want to make sure that we get the administration to improve upon. So thank you so much for that. And lastly, I really want to thank my constituent, Ms. McNeil, for your incredibly compelling testimony that really puts a face on why this is so important and why we're so deeply committed to doing this work. And lastly, I just want to thank our chair for her phenomenal work in chairing this hearing and her partnership. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. This concludes our panel. So we'll now check one last time for those who registered but are not currently logged in for the record. So just checking for Erica Brewington, Alonzo Baker, Darlene Jackson, and Eric Adrahiro. Apologies for the pronunciation. We'll wait one moment. Also, if there's anyone logged in that we have inadvertently missed and who would like to testify, if you can please use the raise hand function in Zoom. We'll just wait one moment to see if there's anyone that we missed. Okay, we're not seeing any hands and no new logins. So that will conclude the public testimony portion of this hearing.
Great, thank you. Again, I want to thank Councilmember Menon, the staff, for all of the work that was put into today's hearing. I think we got a lot of good information to move forward with as we pursue creating a space in a city where we have truly universal, affordable health care, childcare for folks. We're going to follow up with the administration on the questions that went unanswered, and just continue to take the input. Please don't forget that you still have the ability to submit written testimony, and can and should do that. And again, looking forward to continuing the discussion on this really, really important topic. Thank you.